So nice.
So yeah, from my Rabbi Foreman book, and she said, "You."
Okay. We're back. Good morning. I hope everybody had great Yantif. And I'm so happy that we could be back to this, because this is one of the things that I miss about our routine, and is the Tuesday mornings. And especially now that we get back to Bereshis, where there's so much to cover, which, like I'm thinking, like just trying to work through this specific topic. I don't know that I could do it in 1 week necessarily, because there's so many different components of it. I'll try my best. And the beauty is like I have to come up with absolutely nothing original here, because first of all, everything is in the text. So what I want to share with you is based. I've used this before. Rav Tzvi Grummet, who actually I think years ago used to teach in TABC. Now he teaches in Shrag. He teaches in other places. A tremendous Talmud Chacham and biblical scholar, and he's just an awesome guy. And his wife also is Naomi. She's also quite the impressive individual. You should look her up. And so he wrote a book on Bereshis, which is just like, as you know me, and you've been with me long enough to know how much we have to pay attention to the text. So we're going to look a little bit at Parshat Noach, but sort of like the leading into Parshat Noach, and more of a macro structure based on the way the Rav Grummet teaches it. So I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to go to the, unless does everybody have a chumash or no?
I do.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It's actually easier if I don't have to share on the screen. This way we can look together, and I'll call out the spots. Okay, this way, it's just easier for me to see everybody, or to see your names in a box. That's easier for me to see. With the Zoom is here to stay. See, I like Flores has a nice background. It makes me think of warmer days. It's only 7 months till Pesach. Don't worry. Okay, so we get to the end of Bereshis, and a lot happens in the first 5 chapters. So we have, and this is going to be important. Are you familiar with the Bereshis 1 versus Bereshis 2 kind of thing, where there's sort of two recountings or accountings of creation? Okay, and that'll come into play. Then there's there's creation of the world, and then there's Adam and Eve, and then there's that whole mess in Gan Eden, and then of course they have kids, and that doesn't work out so great for them. And then next thing you know, we're getting to Noach, and God's destroying the world. You're like, wait, what happened? Like we just barely like change the covers back from the whites on the Torah, and already God is destroying the world. Simchas Torah is still fresh in our minds, and already God is like, okay, I need a flood. Now, we have to start this by looking at beginning of chapter 6. So if you're in the Stone Chumash, it's on page 26. If you're anywhere else, it's still in chapter 6, and we have lots of structure. Now, by the way, there's a whole interesting, fascinating look at the structure of the Toldos of the generations, and why they follow a certain format, and then it breaks format, and how they recreate previous generations. But that's a shiur for another time. So look at beginning of chapter 6. Okay, the previous chapter ended that Noach was 500 years old, and Noach has 3 sons, which is important because we're going to hear that information again. So then it became that when man was increasing upon the ground, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of rulers, this doesn't, Elohim is not God, this is like judges. The word for judges in Hebrew can also be Elohim, and like a Dayan. And the sons of rulers, important people, they saw the daughters of men were good, and they took themselves wives from whomever they chose. And then Hashem continues. Vayomer Hashem li'adon ruchi ba'adam la'olam b'shagam hu basar v'hayu yamav 120 shana. Hanafim hayu ba'aretz b'yom hahem v'gam achrei chen asher yavo b'nei Elohim el benos adam v'yadu lahem hema hagiburim Hashem olam anshe Hashem. This is a very weird kind of few psukim. Hashem says, my spirit will not contend evermore concerning man, since he's flesh. He's going to be only 120 years. So no more of these like 900-year-old birthdays. You know my shtick, my bit. The announcements in shul that week. Mazel tov to Mr. and Mrs. Noach, sponsoring Kiddush today in honor of their 650th wedding anniversary. Mazel tov. Kiddush, Shal Shudas is sponsored by Misu Shelach, who is celebrating the 976th anniversary of his bar mitzvah. Like whatever. You get the point. So here's okay. Give me 120. By the way, this is the first notion of this notion 120, 120, which is an important number for us. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Don't ask me what Nephilim is. That's for another time. Rashi, look at Rashi. Rashi says some crazy stuff here. And also the sons of rulers would be with the daughters of man. They were mighty from old were men of devastation. So not great. Like all of a sudden, it's like setting the table for, wait a minute, things are starting to kind of go off track. Things are maybe, not where they're supposed to be. So now we have these psukim, pasuk hey, till the end of the parsha. Hey, vav, zayin.
I'm sorry. What page are you on in the stone?
I'm sorry?
What page are you on in the stone?
I'm on the bottom of page 26. Who's that, by the way, 201? Who's 201?
Me, Chedva.
Oh, Vivian. Hello.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to get. It's not letting me go on. Never mind. I just don't want to interrupt. What page? You're on page 26?
Bottom of page. Don't interrupt for you. Are you kidding me? Bottom of page 26. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna mute you so in case you sneeze. So now Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'adam ba'oretz v'chol yetzer machshivos libo rak kol hayom oy gevalt. Hashem sees that the wickedness of man was great upon earth. Every product of the thoughts of his heart was evil, but always, or was but evil always. In other words, man is no good. I mean, this is very damning because it's like, whoa, what's going on? Vayinachem Hashem ki asayis adam ba'aretz vayitzatzev el libo. Unbelievable sort of personification here that we have in the name of God is that he saw that the wickedness of men is great. Hashem, Vayinachem, the word Vayinachem, this is the first time that it ever appears in the Chumash, which means when we talk about consolation, it's based on this. Nechama is based on this. Nechama means to change your outlook. We've discussed that in the past. But Hashem reconsidered. It's like, wait a minute. You don't usually associate these terms, especially with the God of creation who just created the world from nothing. And if he says it is, and like, does it mean that God made a mistake? Is God fallible? Like all these kind of questions that come up, but to even use the term that God reconsidered, he's like, maybe this wasn't the best idea. And all this, and not only that, Vayisatzev el libo, he had, the stone translates it on page 29, he had heartfelt sadness. You could have a field day with this, but God's sad. Well, all of a sudden God has feelings and God's talking about his feelings. It's part of the woke culture now. Is that what's going on? Is that, God was triggered and he has, you could go on and on like, right? But it's definitely sucks you in and gets your attention. Vayomer Hashem emches adam asher barasim al pnei adam mi'ad ba'mehema ad remes va'rov hashamayim ki nichamti ki asisim. Hashem says, I'm going to blot out man that I created from the face of the ground, from man to animal to creeping thing to birds of the sky, because I have reconsidered for having made them. Okay. However, there's Noach. The last pasuk ends in Noach. Now, notice there's a parsha break here. Now, it's not a halachic break, meaning like a Torah parsha break, but it's a parsha break like we have. It's what's called the parsha psucha, but it continues in the next parsha. Now, before you know anything, before going to the next page, God just said, I don't like what's going on here. Man is corrupt. I have to get rid of man. I have to get rid of animal. I have to wipe everything from the face of the ground. However, there's Noach. What should follow? What should follow is Hashem giving instructions to Noach, if indeed he wants to save Noach. Here, Noach, I like you. You're good. Everyone bad, Noach good. People bad, Noach good. Here, we're gonna save you. Here's what you do. But that's not exactly what happens. And it's subtle, but it's only subtle because there's a parsha break, because this was the end of last week and we kind of forgot about it. And we start off this parsha. The parsha gives us a second introduction. Now we can turn to the beginning of Parshas Noach, page 30. And the beginning of Parshas Noach, starting with verse 9, gives us a new introduction to the story. Eila toldos Noach. Oh, by the way, didn't we just say that in a few verses ago? We said that in the end of chapter 5, we're told of Noach's descendants. All of a sudden now we have Noach's descendants again. These are the generations of Noach. By the way, Noach, he was a tzaddik. He was a tzaddik in his generation. I know all the Torah in his generation, old generation. Blah, 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 blah. He starts off as a tzaddik. He has 3 sons. Now all of a sudden, verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vatishachis haaretz lifnei ha'elokim, vatimalei haaretz chamatz, vayar elokim ha'aretz ki hinei nishchas ki hishchis kol basaretz darko al haaretz. Hashem, the earth has become corrupt before God, and the earth has become filled with robbery. Hamas is robbery. That's, they say that it's a specific type of thievery, okay, whatever it is, but whatever, it's not good, it's corruption. Hashem saw, so it's interesting that the word for corruption in Chumash is Hamas. Do with that what you want. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupted, for all the flesh has corrupted its way upon the earth. Now Hashem says to Noach, okay, now we have to get rid of everything. He says to Noach, by the way, the end is near. The sky is falling. The earth is filled with Hamas. I have to destroy them from the earth. Then he tells him, by the way, go make an ark. Go make this teva. Which, interesting, I think there was in the Israeli news yesterday, they did some sort of excavations. They found these things where there was like specific rooms maybe for people in the ark, in the place where they think the ark was. I don't know. Interesting how they always had these archaeological discoveries in today's times, which are only bolster our understanding of Chumash. Okay, now, so zoom out. At the end of Parshas Bereshis, we have an introduction to the story of the flood. Beginning of Parshas Noach, we have an introduction to the story of the flood. Why 2 introductions? Now, if you look carefully, though, you'll see that they're very different. Okay? Take a second and look at both sets of verses. The verses at the end of, this is why it's easier for me to, as opposed to like making you dizzy and flipping back on the screen, but to look, if we have a book in front of us, it's much easier. God willing, we'll all be in person soon enough. Look at the verses in the beginning of Noach and look at the verses at the end of Bereshis and tell me what jumps out at you. Is there a theme to each one? It's either that or I have to call on Vivian. Take a minute, read it carefully. It's really fascinating. Think of like dominant words in each section. And this is going to be why, by the way, one of those things where when we wrap it all up, if we ever do, that, oh my God, I can't believe I never saw this before. It's that good. Again, it's not me, it's Rabbi Grumman. I'm just a shliach. In Bereshis, when God talks about what's wrong, what's the focal point of God's sort of disappointment with his creation?
In the man.
Correct. Oh my God. Dolores, you said that?
Yep.
Amazing. You should just learn full time. You should go back. You should learn in Kulo. So look at it. Look how many times, 4 times, Hashem sees Ra'as Ha'adam. Hashem is sad. He reconsiders because he made Ha'adam. I will emche es Ha'adam. Me Adam ad behema. 4 times it talks about man. Look in the beginning of Noach. What's the focus? What's the Aretz? Correct. It's not nothing. It doesn't mention man at all. It's all about Aretz. How many times is Aretz mentioned? Okay. Tisha Chesa Aretz is 1. Vatimalei ha'aretz is 2. Vayaretz ha'aretz is 3. Al ha'aretz is 4. Mal ha'aretz chanas b'leihem. Mashchizem 6 times. 6 times in this opening salvo is it about art. So it's as if the Torah is setting up for us 2 different introductions.
It also uses the word hishachet an awful lot.
Yes, absolutely. Because that's like real, and we have to see maybe because we're trying to draw. I think what he was trying to say is that it's trying to draw your attention towards something to draw it away from something, which I'll explain in a second. Okay. Not only that, in the Bereshis introduction, when I say Bereshis, meaning the end of Parshas Bereshis, it's always look at the name for Hashem. Vayar Hashem. It's Adonai. Yud Ke Vav Ke. Over here in the land, it's Elokim. 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 Different names of God always mean different things. One is the midah of justice. One is the midah of mercy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, not only that, the Vatimalei ha'aretz chamas is also kind of this play on words. What was the purpose of mankind vis-a-vis the world? What was the charge given to them? Peru, Uruvu, right? And what comes after that? I'll give you a hint. It's 128. So if you go back to 128, again, this is why it's a lot of flipping. You need a lot of stuff here. Look at page 8, verse 28. God blessed him. This is the first accounting of creation. Vayivarach Hashem Elokim, vayomer lehem Elokim, Peru urvu umil'u et haaretz v'kivshuha. What's the land supposed to be filled with? Umil'u et haaretz. It's supposed to be mil'u with people, not supposed to be mil'u with. So instead of, but the land is correct because instead of vatimalei haaretz with little kids and people, whatever, vatimalei haaretz is with Hamas. Okay. By the way, perhaps the repair for this, or kind of like the I'll get you back, is in the very beginning of Shemos, which is also in the first chapter. When we're talking about the Jewish people, you don't have to turn there. I'll read it to you, and it says that what happens that the Yosef died and the whole generation, and what happens? The Jewish people were then fruitful and they multiplied. And they were very great in number. And then Vatimalei haaretz osam. The land was filled with them. Again, it's sort of everything kind of comes full circle. Whereas that was the original charge. And here at the beginning of Noach, that was not being fulfilled because it's instead of being filled with osam, it was filled with Hamas. Only later on in the beginning of Shemos, when the Jewish people start multiplying and fruitfullying, whatever it's called, they become osam. Okay, fine. Now, it could be that maybe these 2 introductions.
Can I say one other thing?
Yes.
In all of creation, when it goes through each of the days, it uses only the word Elokim. And when Hashem forms man, that's the first time we see Yud Ke Vav Ke instead of Elokim.
That's correct, which appears in the chapters 2 and 3.
Right.
Which is a perfect segue. So tell me what. So let's go back to the chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Okay, so chapter 1, God creates the world and all the things in it, et cetera, et cetera. And then chapters 2 and 3 focus on the creation of humanity. So it could be that each one of these introductions corresponds to one of those chapters, which what you're saying, Yael, is correct, which is 100% correct. That's exactly what Rabbi Grummet says, is the Elokim here, when here in Elokim, the land, corresponds to God's creation in chapter 1. Mm-hmm. Hashem with man corresponds to God's creation in chapters 2 and 3, which is not uncommon, by the way, to see that structure where you have the 2 bookends. You have topic A, topic B, and then it's closed out with topic B and closed out with topic A. It's called Abba. I mean, I call it Abba, but ABBA. Okay, FOIL method, the first, outer, inner, something. I have a kid starting high school math now, and it's like she's like, "Can you help me?" I'm like, "Absolutely not." There's a reason why I didn't take calculus. But that's exactly it. What the Torah is this is when you look at it from a literary point of view, the Torah is drawing your attention to say, this goes with that, And that goes with that. There's the decline of humanity, and there's also the decline of creation. Now.
But can I just ask you, can you remind me which goes with which is considered justice and which is considered mercy? I was mixing.
Elohim is justice.
Okay, thank you.
Elohim is justice. Okay. And if that's the case, and if these introductions, which lead into the story of the Mabul, okay, so here's where terminology becomes super, super important, okay? And the scholars for many years have written about sort of this, the repetitive nature of the story of Noach, why the two introductions, and also, by the way, the two endings. If you look at the end in chapter 9, there's actually two accountings of the rainbow. All right, so just by the by. So if you look in the beginning of chapter 9, let's say page 42. 42, this is after the flood is over. Again, you have to do a lot of back and forth of like, it's going, it's not going, okay? So in chapter 9, God says in verse 12, this is the sign of the covenant that I give between me and you and every living being that's with you for generations forever. This is why when Jews see rainbows, we all of a sudden we get like all nostalgic, right? You ever see a rainbow in the sky after like a hot summer day and there's a crazy storm that lasts for 10 minutes and you go outside, oh my gosh, a rainbow. And who doesn't think of this? And then there's a whole question, well, there's a bracha, what bracha do I make? And the bracha is related very much to this. And then there's like, oh, no, you can't take a picture of it. There's all kinds of like heebie-jeebie stuff, pictures of rainbow, okay. Trust me, we take pictures anyway, and we put it on Facebook. Otherwise, you're not Yotzei. So God says, here's the covenant. I have set my rainbow in the cloud. It'll be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And it'll happen that when I place a cloud over the earth and the bow will see it in the cloud, I'll remember my covenant between me and you and every living being among the flesh, and the water will never become a flood to destroy the flesh. And again, it says, and the bow shall be in the cloud. I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant. It's repetitive. He just said that. Why saying it again? And God says to Noach, the last pasuk, this is the sign of the covenant that I've confirmed. In other words, this deliberately repetitive nature is there for a reason. Now, here's where the key is, and it comes again, as I said, terminology. If you would ask anybody, what does God do in Parshat Noach? What, Gail? I see you saying something.
He destroys the world.
He destroys the world. Okay, that's usually the term that we use. Now, if we fine tune it based on the way we're looking at it, we could say that God is not so much destroying the world as he is uncreating it. We have to hit this. In other words, God says, like, I see what humanity is up to. I see what the world is up to, the creations. It's Hamas. And that's why the word is meaning we have to restart this. Not wipe out, but we have to restart. We have to reset. So God is saying, it's not so much I have to destroy the world, but I need to uncreate it, if there's a way, deconstruct it, and then reconstruct it. And this is borne out very much in the text, which gives us a whole new appreciation of what's going on here. Because if the Torah in the introduction is deliberately connecting us to creation or two episodes of creation, then we have to look at how those two episodes are uncreated and then maybe recreated. Okay, you with me? We good? Great. Let's look at a couple of things. If you look in the in page 33, we can gloss through in the English. If you have the English, if not, it's beginning of chapter 7. And this is just, these kind of like these mirror image things of what's going on. He tells me you have to take all the animals into the teva, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, in verse 4, in 7 days' time, I'll send rain upon the earth. Then it's going to be 40 days and 40 nights. And he does this. He waits 7 days, 40 days, 40 nights. And then what happens after 40 days and 40 nights? Okay. It says that, that what? Machiti, right? But and then what happens? What after this? So again, on page 35, there's this. I'm just looking strictly at the numbers. There's 7 day period. The waters of the flood are on the earth. Then it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and they are in the ark. Okay. The waters strengthen. They've filled up all the earth, etc. All the earth. What? The water. Look at the end of the chapter. the water strengthened on the earth 150 days. Right? So it's 7, 40, 150. 7 days of waiting period to get everything settled in the ark, 40 days of actual rain, 150 days, the water rises. Look what happens at the end of it. What happens on chapter 8? Look at verse 3. The fountains of the deep were closed. The rain stops. The water then recedes from the earth. The waters diminish at the end of 150 days. The waters then keep diminishing, et cetera, et cetera. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days. And then Noach has to go send out a bird, and he has to wait to send out a second bird. Guess what? After how many days? 7 days. So it starts off 7, 40, 150. And then to reverse that, it goes 150, 40 to 7. Okay. Not only that, look at verse 23 on page 36. Okay. You said that. You pointed out only, right? Vayimach? Vayimach. So read that verse, Vayimach. It's on page 37 or page 36. The last, the penultimate verse of when God actually destroys the world. It says, Vayimach es kol hayakum asher al pnei ha'adama, me adam ad behema ad remes ve'ad of hashamayim vayimachu min ha'aretz vayishaer ach Noach v'asher ito bat teva. He blots out all the existence that was on the face of the earth, from man to animals to creeping things to the birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Okay. Now, if you would look in the days of creation, it goes man, then animal, then remes, creepy crawly things, then birds. You're not going to believe this. How are they created in order of creation? It was birds, then remes, creepy crawly things, then animals, and then of course created last was mankind. So this destruction is the deconstruction or the uncreation, so to speak. It's exactly reversing the order of creation. Okay, in verse 11 there. Okay, going back a page on page 34, and again, I know we're jumping around a lot, but you have to understand this. In verse 11, it says, "Bishna shlish me'o shana l'chayei Noach," in the 600th year in the life of Noach, b'chodesh hasheni, in the second month. So we know that this is in ER, v'shivasar yom l'chodesh, and it's interesting that Torah gives the exact dates. Okay, but we need that. Bayom hazeh nivkeu kol mayanos tahum rabba va'arubos hashamayim niftachu. All the, what does it say? The fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. So what happens ultimately is that, by the way, we see Tehom. When you see the word Tehom, what do you think of? You think of creation, because in the beginning of creation, it says that God took the waters from the Tehom, from the deep. And then ultimately in creation, God created a separation of heaven and earth, a separation of water and dry land. And here what's happening? The exact opposite. We are now blurring the lines. There's no more separation between dry land and water. There's no separation between the deep and this thing. Everything comes back one mess. Ultimately, what's happening? Everything is going back to tohu vavohu. Everything is going back to sort of this hodgepodge, however you define tohu vavohu, but it's this sort of hodgepodge of like nothingness. There's no formation. There's nothing else happening. Okay, now. This gets even a little bit more interesting when we talk about now, if anything's going to be, so if let's say we establish that God said, okay, now I have to undo the world, because God could have just said, look, I'll destroy the world and like be done with it. Like, why start over again? Because sometimes when, and maybe that's one of the lessons that we have to learn, is that sometimes when we mess up, or when we don't fulfill our tafkid, or we don't fulfill our purpose, we have to go back to square one, and we have to start over, right? Don't we say that? We say it to our kids all the time, like you make a mistake, go back to the beginning, check your work, redo it again, in any scenario. And we're lucky, by the way, sometimes when we have the ability to restart, because sometimes we hit points in life where it's too late and people think, oh, you can't restart. There's the whole notion of tshuva, by the way, that you can actually go back to square one and you could do something that you haven't done before. So if we accept that and God says, okay, this isn't good. This isn't working. Man, land, nothing's working. We have to deconstruct. Let's go back to square one. and now let's start again. So if we look at the restart, okay, we go to chapter 8. In chapter 8, in the beginning of the, on page 36, again, page 36, 37, this is when the flood has already stopped. Hashem remembers Noach, okay. Verse 2. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Okay, so this is almost like the rain stops and the sky appears again. This is similar to the Rakia. The Rakia, by the way, which was created on day 2 of the original creation. Okay, then if you go down a few verses, he has to then send out, what's the first living creature that gets mentioned here after the flood, that gets to do something as a bird. Okay, he sends a bird to find, and what's the purpose of the bird? The bird has to find something. Like, can you find any sort of vegetation? Is there any dry land? Is there any trees growing? Is there anything left there? That's, vegetation. That's day 3 of Bria. Day 5, the next thing, we have flying animals, which is birds, okay? And then when you get to verses 18 and 19 on the next page, what happens? Everything is he tells them, go out, you have the remes ha'aretz, chaya, kol remes, kol ha'of, everything has to go from the ark. Again, remes, animals, day 6 of creation, and then are the people coming out, okay? So the term, so going back to what Shelley said about hashchasa, the word hishchit, to destroy, it's not so much of like, and by the way, the destruction, the focus of that word destruction was not used for man. It was used for the land, as if to say, it's not working. Something is awry, something is amiss, and therefore it's corrupted, and we have to start over. And it's not that, because otherwise, if it was man, that's a different story. Because if it was man, then starting over, you're going to get the same thing. So maybe something has to happen here differently, or maybe the way man treats the earth. And this is like the ultimate sort of, if you're into the ecology and this and that, is like the ultimate parsha. There was a topic, there was a cover article a few editions ago of the Jerusalem Report. I know everybody reads the Jerusalem Report. I happen to like that magazine. There's lots of different points of view, really interesting interest stories of literature and Israel, archaeology, whatever. And it's one of the things. It's the magazine published by the Jerusalem Post. Okay, I subscribed to it once like 20 years ago, and no matter where I go, they track me down and they figure out my credit card and how to charge it. And I can't stop it. So I just stopped trying to stop it because they just keep finding me. And somehow, and it's probably run by the Mossad, I don't know. And that's supposed to be easy to find. But they have, so a few issues ago on the cover story was about Judaism and vegetarianism, okay? Which, I'm firmly against. Having being a starka meat eater, also, there's not much left for me to eat. But they're based on this parsha, when the Torah says, okay, now you can eat meat, which implies like up until now you couldn't, and then like to eat meat is sort of like you're allowed to. It's not an optimal performance, and there are those that take that position. So there's an interesting conversation, and people, again, I'm talking about like halachic thinkers who have this notion that vegetarianism is the ideal. My wife is not a vegetarian for idealistic reasons. It's for, when she was a little kid, somebody told her where meat came from, and that was it for her. Like, so our kids eat meat, and she cooks like, oh, geschmack. That's we've made it all these years. Okay, so the hashchasa is so much like God has to. It's not so much a destruction or corruption. It's like we have to undo it and then redo it. And this is also borne out. It's borne out even in a halachic sense. Okay, so if I would ask you, what is a person not allowed to do on Shabbos? So it depends what group. First of all, it depends what group you're addressing. I used to teach, if you remember years ago, Central Hebrew High School. Remember that? They used to be held in Kushner. A million years ago, they had all these high school kids, 9th, 10th, 11th graders, whose parents basically forced them to go to Hebrew school twice a week on Sundays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I had the illustrious task of teaching these incorrigible teenagers. And one of them who happens to be my next door neighbor right now, and he still remembers it. So, which is Richard Kimwitz, which is like, he's like, yeah, I remember you're my teacher. And I used to do this free. So now most of them do not come from observant backgrounds. Some from like a traditional sort of conservative synagogue backgrounds. And I used to ask, when I say the word Shabbos or Sabbath, what do you associate it with? And every single one, to a T, the association was negative. I can't do this. My parents won't let me go out Friday night. I can't. I'm forced to do. Sometimes I have to go to synagogue, which you would love to see a change in that, a paradigm shift where we look at Shabbos and like, thank God, no phone, like family time, I could sleep a little later, even like whatever it might be, shul, learning, shiur, whatever it might be. You hope that the association is positive. How many people came out of yesterday saying like, wow, my life was actually a little bit more quality filled because social media was hacked or whatever happened. I don't know, something happened. Happens to be that the whistleblowers in Congress and on 60 Minutes or whatever, and the next day it goes off. Interesting. But it also shows you how much power one guy has. Like Facebook. I'm telling you, there's lots to talk about there. But wow, we lived without it. Like, oh my gosh, like I didn't have to check my feed, and we survived. It's an interesting thing. So we talk about what you can't do on Shabbos. We have what's called 39 malachos. What are the 39 malachos based on what? It says creative activities that God used. Well, we used it for the Mishkan, and ultimately with what's called a creative mastery over the universe. If you want a good treatise on this, you read the book The Sabbath by Diane Grunfeld, based on the teachings of Rav Shamshon Hirsch. A little thin book, but probably the best Shabbos book you'll ever read, in my opinion. Really giving a healthy understanding of what it means to keep Shabbos. But a lot of those things like creative. So what creative? Like I'm not allowed to erase on Shabbos. I'm not allowed to tear on Shabbos. How is that creative? So if you look in the Gemara and the way it's codified in Halacha, it's Korea almanat litfor. It's mochek almanat lichtov. So even in creative activity, it always has to be that if it's destructive or if it's deconstructive, it has to be with the notion that it's going to be put back together again. And that's why if you tear things and it's not going to be reconstructed, it's not in the same category. That's our whole permissibility. Let's say when we open packages on Shabbos, of course, not tearing letters, but when we open packages, if it's a reusable container, it becomes more problematic. If it's something that will never be used again, that's straight destruction, and that's what's called kilkul. That's not considered a melacha. Okay, so that's the notion of destructing or deconstructing is always on the condition that maybe something better has to come. Okay, now if we look also this notion of birth and rebirth. And again, it gives a whole new understanding and appreciation of what God did here, especially just borne out by the Psukim. Look at the numbers. What's the key number? And it's a key number throughout Jewish life, is the number we're asking. How many days was Noach on the Teva? Right? 40 days. We say, even though it was a lot more, but it was 40 days of a storm, okay? Can you list off the significance of the number 40 in Judaism? Where else do we have the number 40? Moshe's on the mountain, 40 days and 40 nights.
40
Right?
years in the desert.
40 years in the desert. Right? Moshe's 40 days on the mountain. What happens when Moshe comes down off the mountain? What does the Psukim in Kisisa tell us? He's reborn.
Yeah.
Not the ego, but like when he comes off his completing his mission is 40 days, it says he had to wear a mask. He had to wear, they use the word masveh, not masecha. He had to wear a mask because his face was aglow. He becomes a new person. He has a new countenance. When the Jewish people go through 40 years in the desert, it's to create a new generation. It's a rebirth. The spies, the Meraglim, they go into Israel for how long? 40 days. And they come back. What changes? Their perception of themselves. They say, oh, we are like grasshoppers. It's a transformative period. There are 40 weeks of pregnancy. The Gemara says that there are 40 days of Yetziras Havlad, as that after 40 days, a fetus is considered viable, and therefore falls into all different halacha category. Again, I don't want to get into politics. I don't want to get into any laws in Texas or anything like that, whatever you may feel about that. But I'm just saying, halachically speaking, a vlad is considered viable. A fetus is considered viable after 40 days. And there's a big difference. Let's say when they have health concerns. And by the way, it's not to say there are absolutely cases, I know of this firsthand, having been involved in psak halacha with certain people. There are cases where abortion is legal in halacha. Not just because of how you feel, but for a variety of reasons. We're not going into particulars. That's a whole other shiur for another time. But when you look at those cases, there's a difference when it's before 40 days or after 40 days. The 40 malachos, we talk about creation, it's really 39. 40 lashes. When a person gets arba'im, malchus arba'im, when a person gets lashes, you change from being a sinner, and after you get lashes, you're no longer considered a sinner. It's like you've been absolved from this. And again, I said like the 40, and so anywhere in the number 40, so the Torah is giving you these visual cues, these number cues of saying like, okay, whatever went wrong, Bereshis 1, Elokim, creation of the world, Vatishaches, that's the bookend, Elokim, the land is corrupt. Bereshis 2 and 3, creation of man and humanity, and the end of the Parsha Bereshis, that's B and B. What happens? Man becomes a problem. Man has issues. We have to fix that. We don't fix it by getting rid of it. We fix it by taking it apart, and then we put it back together again. And therefore, the Mabul is not so much destruction as it is deconstruction, or we like to say the word decreation or uncreation, if there was such a word. Okay. And when we look at it in that sense, because otherwise, like, what's the point? Why does God have to go through all this? Just wipe everything and start over. Because there is good in man. And Noach is a very challenging figure. He's a challenging biblical figure because he starts off, like at a 90 approval rating, and by the end of his term, he's at a 30 approval rating, like every president. What have you done for me lately, right? So that's and it only makes him that much more relatable. Somebody who goes and he starts off great, and then reality kicks in, and I just, oh man, this is not for me, and he becomes ish tzaddik, becomes ish adama. But at the end of the day, there's nobody else in the Chumash called tzaddik. Yosef is referred to as tzaddik, but he's never called tzaddik. Yosef HaTzaddik, we call him that. But the Chumash calls only Noach HaTzaddik. Never says Avraham HaTzaddik, doesn't say Moshe HaTzaddik, doesn't say Aaron HaTzaddik, Yehoshua HaTzaddik, Yitzchak HaTzaddik, Yaakov HaTzaddik, nothing. Only Noach HaTzaddik. So as much as people like to pick on Noach, he did pretty well. So what I'm toying with is maybe sort of next time, if we continue it, because really in order to go further, you kind of have to take this a little bit further, but and it's worth it now when you look through the text again and you look it over Shabbos, you kind of look at it in that lens and it changes sort of how you see things. Let's see, why Noach? What's his job then? Or did he fulfill his potential in recreation after decreation after creation? So it's creation, uncreation, recreation, lots of interesting things here, but you always have to look at it, and it's all borne out in the text. That's why it's so beautiful. This is not Devarim. This is not even Bamidbar. This is Bereshis, where we could sink our teeth in and look at every single thing and see so many beautiful things just in the words themselves. So anyway, I'm so happy to be back, and God willing, we'll continue next time, and I hope everybody is doing great. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.